As we have a quorum, we can begin, and the committee today is in public session. First of all, we've received apologies from Senator Richmond, and I'd like to remind people of the mobile phone notice to please switch off their phones. And now, today, first of all, I obviously want to welcome our Minister McEntee, her officials and everyone in the public gallery. Today is European Day of Languages. It's very important to celebrate Europe's languages and cultures, all diversities, and that's why it's particularly nice to have people in the public gallery from all over. So today we have an engagement on the work of the General Affairs Council with Minister McEntee. Following last week's meeting in Brussels, I want to thank you very much, Minister, for meeting with us today, and indeed for your evening yesterday evening where we had a debate in the Dáil on Brexit and Brexit-related issues. We always find these engagements on your work in the Council and the big strategic issues facing the European Union very useful. I'm sure there is lots for the members and yourself to discuss, as we have not met with you since before the summer break. I know that the General Affairs Council has been, they've had further discussions on issues which are of particular interest to this committee, such as the rule of law in Poland, the next multi-annual financial framework, and of course, Brexit. There has been a lot of discussion about Brexit in the last week, in particular following the meeting of the General Affairs Council and the informal European Council summit in Salzburg. And while this is very important, we also have to keep sight of all of these issues and try and keep on top of our game at all times. I just wish to remind you, Minister, obviously as a member of the Oireachtas, you're well aware of the rules and privilege, so I needn't read them out. So could I please ask you, Minister, without further delay, to please make your opening statement, and then we'll take questions and contributions from the members. Thank you again for being here, Minister.
Thank you, Chairman, and as always, thank you for the invitation to be here. I think it's really important that we do meet, although it is every couple of months, but it gives us an opportunity, obviously, for you to do your work, me to do mine, and then to engage on the relevant issues. I'll join with you in acknowledging the importance of languages, as I suppose, having spent the last year engaging with students and universities and engaging with our European colleagues, the development of languages in this country is really, really important, I think, in strengthening those relationships. So I join with you in that. Maybe before we get into the detail of Brexit, the MFF, the rule of law, migration, and many of the other issues that are on the agenda, if I could perhaps maybe first pause to remember, I think for many people in this room, and certainly for those who knew him, a dear friend and colleague, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, His Excellency Peter Koch, who unfortunately passed away recently, and his death was sudden and I think a shock to a lot of people. He was very much loved and admired, and someone who I got to know in recent months and found him very enthusiastic and dedicated to his job here, but also representing his country at home. So just to his wife and to his children, we offer our condolences, and obviously our thoughts are with them at this difficult time. If I could start, I suppose, with the one that is maybe most on people's minds at the moment, an update on Brexit. Negotiations resumed on the 16th of August following the small, I would say, summer recess. They're ongoing continuously since then. EU leaders reviewed progress during the informal European Council summit, which was held in Salzburg last week. As President Tusk made clear in his remarks following the summit, all partners were agreed that there will be no withdrawal agreement without an operational and a legally binding Irish backstop. Leaders reaffirmed their full support for Michel Barnier in his efforts on this, and this includes his efforts to de-dramatise the backstop. A legally operable backstop which avoids a hard border and protects the integrity of the single market is essential for agreeing the withdrawal agreement, so as to provide for certainty that no matter what the outcome of the negotiations in the future relationship, that there won't be a hard border on the island of Ireland. It's imperative that the UK in these final stages of the negotiations that they engage with the issues that have already been identified in the protocol and to try and achieve progress by the October European Council. The UK have themselves provided a guarantee on avoiding a hard border. They've made this clear commitment a number of times, and they have agreed that a backstop must be included in the overall withdrawal agreement. There are now, however, just a couple of weeks left to deliver on these commitments and to try and conclude on the overall withdrawal agreement, and we would encourage them to come forward with those proposals. The October European Council meeting on the 18th of October, despite maybe what some people might think, still remains the target to achieve the maximum progress and results in these negotiations. At that meeting, Ireland and our EU partners will then decide if conditions are sufficient enough to call what has been termed as an extraordinary summit in November to try and finalise and to formalise the deal. Real progress on the backstop will be an essential part of that decision. If there is nothing to deal with at the October meeting, it's very hard to understand then what we would be discussing at another summit at a later date. So in that regard, time is running short. As the Taoiseach has said and said again last week in Salzburg, we need to redouble our efforts over the coming weeks to make sure that we can successfully complete negotiations and agree a deal. And in this regard, it is very welcome that last Friday Prime Minister May promised to come forward with proposals on the backstop. These proposals should be tangible. They should be tabled urgently so that the negotiating teams can engage constructively and finalise the legal text of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. In terms of contingency planning and preparedness from our own point of view and from a government perspective, in addition to our ongoing efforts and intensive efforts to secure a good outcome for Ireland from the negotiations, the government, we believe, has been responsible and measured in its approach to preparing for Brexit. Our work has intensified in the recent months as well as advanced in many different stages. A whole-of-government response has been taken forward through the cross-departmental coordination structures, which are chaired by my own Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with Minister Coghlan at the helm, as well as the work at home. This helps us engage actively with the European Commission's Article 50 Task Force and its Brexit Preparedness Unit on areas where the lead policy roles lies within the EU. Last week, the Cabinet approved the latest phase of this preparedness planning in relation to staffing. This included the phased recruitment of some 450 additional staff, which are expected in 2019, and this includes additional customs, additional veterinary and food safety inspectors also. This follows on from Brexit preparedness measures, which focused on an east-west trade only, and this was agreed earlier on in the summer at the last Cabinet meeting in July. Contingency planning for a no-deal outcome, which brings together detailed work, is being undertaken by individual ministers and their departments and has been from the very beginning of this whole process. It was identified as an early priority and it is well advanced. It's focused on the immediate economic, the immediate regulatory and operational challenges which would result from such an outcome, and it looks at all of the possible outcomes ranging from what we hope will be the closest relationship to a possible no-deal scenario. All of the efforts I have described above have been undertaken in parallel with a nationwide public information and outreach campaign, Getting Ireland Brexit Ready, which was only just launched last week by the Taoiseach together with Minister Humphreys and Minister Creed. And the campaign has two main aims. Firstly, this is a whole-of-government communications effort. It's using online resources and outreach activities to try and build public awareness of implications from Brexit, and this is in areas such as access to goods and services, to travel, other areas as well, and the practical steps that can be taken for people to prepare in all of these cases. The second goal of this campaign is to build further awareness among the public and among businesses on the steps being taken by government and the various financial and other kind of supports that are available to them, and to assist them in their own Brexit preparedness. Government agencies and departments are already running their own events throughout the country and have been doing so for some time now. Next week, on the 5th of October, the first of the series of government information and outreach events will be held in Cork. So we are keen, obviously, to work with you and to work on these outreach events, and the Taoiseach is in the process of writing to each and every one of you, the members of the committee here and others as well, to ask for your assistance in sharing the details of these events to your constituents and more broadly, and obviously to have as many people attend and to be aware of the supports and information that is out there. And Chairman, your help with that would be very much appreciated. This work will continue and intensify in the coming months. The Brexit negotiations, of course, are still ongoing, and this means that there are a lot of uncertainties. However, irrespective of the outcome, we know that change is coming, and through our communications, through supporting efforts, we're making every effort, whether it is online or otherwise, to make sure that citizens and businesses are as prepared as they can be and that they are ready for whenever Brexit does happen. Moving on, in terms of the MFF, or the Multiannual Financial Framework, last week the General Affairs Council, as you mentioned, which I attend, debated this again for the period of 2021 to 27. As the committee knows, the Commission has tabled its initial proposals for the next MFF in May, and the individual legislative proposals for CAP, for Cohesion, Erasmus and the Horizon Europe followed in the subsequent weeks. The Commission's proposal is for a modern, a simplified and a more flexible budget in the order of €1.135 trillion, which is the equivalent of 1.11% of the EU 27's GNI. The scale and complexity of the EU's budget means that the negotiations will take time and effort. Already the Austrian presidency has set a challenging pace. Sectoral councils and working groups have begun examining the individual proposals that make up the substance of the budget. A specific working group is looking at the structure of the budget and how it will be financed. A presidency questionnaire was also circulated to Member States in July, which was for completion in September, and those responses formed the basis of a presidency report which was presented last week. The focus of the General Affairs was on two questions. Firstly, does the MFF proposal reflect EU policy priorities and European added value? And secondly, are those priorities reflected in the proposed allocations of the EU funds? As you might expect, obviously such broad questions drew a broad range of responses reflecting on a variety of views across the table. In my own intervention, I welcome the work to date. I encourage the quick pace and the engagement the agreement in 2019. I said that I believed our policy and our priorities are reflected in the budget, but that they needed to be adequately funded. So in saying that, of course, I was minded of CAP, where we don't feel the right balance has been made yet. Expenditure in the area of agriculture helps support 44 million jobs throughout the EU, which is just under 20%, I think, of overall jobs, which is obviously a substantial figure, and while contributing to rural sustainability, to food security, animal welfare and environmental standards, all of which are key priorities overall for the EU as well, and add European added value. And we know that much here. For every penny that goes into rural communities, there is a ripple effect, and it has a tenfold nearly effect in a lot of communities. The CAP post-2020 is presented with new and upcoming challenges, particularly in the areas of the environment, climate change and biodiversity and health. The new CAP proposals make it very clear that the European agriculture needs to bring a stronger focus to the protection of the environment. Supporting farm incomes will be central to achieving this objective. There is growing support for the proposal to make provision for the restoration of the CAP budget for the year 2021 to 27 period to current levels. Up to 20 Member States have joined in this alliance, and Minister Creed, our own Minister for Agriculture, is pressing that case in the Agricultural Council also. At the General Affairs, I also welcome an investment in research and innovation in order to help the EU economy to keep moving with the fast-paced challenges in the global economy. I welcome the focus on young people with a greatly expanded Erasmus programme, and particularly the focus or the suggestion that we would double our spending on young people. And finally, I reminded ministers that the budget needs to be flexible to be able to deal with the possible negative impacts of Brexit, of which we don't know what the consequences are, but we feel it's very important that that is part of the overall psyche of the budget as well. As I've said before at this committee, the MFF negotiations, I think, will be particularly challenging for us. This is the first time that we will be negotiating an EU budget where we will be without a British contribution, but also where we will be net contributors ourselves from the very outset. As our economy recovers and grows, it also, while it's positive, means that our contribution must grow in tandem with that. So in recognition of the broader EU values of our own other member states, the government has said that we would consider increasing our MFF contribution, but this again is only provided that our core values, that the traditional supports are met, and that European added value is ensured. The General Affairs Council, of course, is likely to return to this every month and every time that we meet, so obviously we'll have a lot more to discuss in the coming months around this committee as well. In terms of the rule of law, since taking office in November 2015, the Polish government has passed legislation making changes to the country's judiciary. These changes, in particular those to the composition and the functionality of Poland's constitutional tribunal and Supreme Court, have prompted considerable protest and criticisms. Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union sets out the values upon which the European Union is founded, and these include the rule of law. Article 7 of the same treaty sets out mechanisms to determine whether there is a clear risk or a breach by a Member State of the values referred to in Article 2. And the most recent developments are as followed. In July, the European Commission launched an infringement procedure. This is regarding the law in the Supreme Court, which changed the retirement ages of the judges. The Commission maintains that this law undermines the principle of judicial independence and is therefore incompatible with EU law. Separately, on the 6th of August, the Polish Supreme Court applied to the Court of Justice for the European Union for guidance in relation to 5 provisions in Poland's new Supreme Court law. A preliminary ruling from the Court of Justice on these elements is expected in the next month in October. In August, the European Commission sent a reasoned opinion to Poland, the next step in its infringement procedure on the Supreme Court law. Poland issued a communiqué then on the 14th of September stating that it had comprehensively addressed the Commission's concerns regarding compliance of the Supreme Court law with EU law, which it considers groundless. The first judicial appointments under the Supreme Court law have been made by the Polish President, with 10 judges appointed to join the newly created disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court. On the 24th of September, the European Commission decided to refer Poland to the Court of Justice of the EU due to the violations of the principle of judicial independence created by the new Supreme Court law. The Commission also asked the Court of Justice to order interim measures restoring Poland's Supreme Court to its situation before the new laws were adopted. An expedited procedure was requested in order to obtain a financial judgment as soon as possible. In terms of the Irish position, we have consistently supported the Commission on this. We have emphasised that dialogue between Poland and the Commission needs to result in substantive outcomes that address all of the concerns which have been identified. In saying that we do know dialogue has continued between the Commission and the Polish Government at various levels, and the issues have been discussed by Ministers at General Affairs Councils at successive meetings this year, including 2 detailed hearings on the issues in the Council in June, and then again we had a hearing last week when the Commission provided useful updates, and I do believe we had a meaningful engagement between Poland and other Member States. The General Affairs may return to this issue in the state of play at its next meeting, which will take place in Luxembourg. Earlier this month, finally on this, the European Parliament adopted a reasoned proposal inviting the Council to determine whether there is a clear risk or a serious breach by Hungary on the values of which the European Union is founded. This is likely again, I think, to feature on the agenda for the next meeting of the General Affairs as an informal point from the Austrian presidency. Moving on to migration, as you already might know, migration has dominated the discussions at the European Council in June, and there was another lengthy session on the issue at the informal summit in Salzburg last week. The Austrian presidency has highlighted this as one of their key priorities, and they've been holding bilateral meetings with Member States at present to try and progress a report on the issues discussed at the June European Council for next month. These include regional disembarkation platforms or controlled centres, reform of the common European asylum system, especially the Dublin regulation, under which asylum applications are assessed in the Member States where the migrant first enters the EU. From an Irish point of view, we are very keen to find a consensus based on a balance of responsibility but also solidarity, and with respect to the proposed platforms and centres, one which respects international law and the standards of the UNHCR and the IOM. Ireland has played a constructive role by opting into relocation and resettlement measures, by contributing naval vessels, by increasing our humanitarian contributions, and we've shown solidarity over the summer months in particular by pledging to take migrants from 3 vessels which were docked in Mediterranean ports and which were struggling to find places for the migrants to go to. We welcomed the renewed focus on relations with Africa, as it will be crucial in the long term to address the root cause of migration, and in that regard we have pledged initially 3 million, then 6 and now 15 million to that particular fund. The Austrian presidency will co-host an African summit in Vienna in December, and there is preparations underway for an EU-Arab League summit again in early 2019. Finally, Chairman, you'll be glad to hear before I conclude, if I could just say a word on the referendum this Sunday in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Skopje and Athens have shown courage and leadership in reaching a deal on the new name for the state, the Republic of North Macedonia. I don't want to underestimate how emotional and I think how challenging this issue has been for many people for many years, but this is an historic opportunity and one which I believe we will strengthen the case for opening EU accession talks over the coming years for the relevant countries. Turnout will be key on that particular day on Sunday if the necessary threshold is to be achieved, and I would urge the entire electorate to exercise their democratic right and civic duty by seizing this opportunity and by endorsing the deal on this name. Finally, I want to thank the committee, Mr Chairman, in particular for the support that you have demonstrated in terms of our citizens' dialogues. I don't have an exact time to give you an exhaustive account of this initiative, but I hope you can join us which we hope the date will be Friday the 12th of October for the launch of our narrative report, which is the next milestone in this process before we submit our overall agenda, I think, to the Romanian summit next May, when the EU is expected to prepare a new strategic agenda on this.
Thank you very much, Minister. Just before we go to the members, I'd just like to thank you, obviously, for that, and also for remembering the late Ambassador Peter Cock, because the members and myself had got to be very friendly with him, a very dedicated and sincere man. We remembered him last week at our meeting, as we were all very upset at his untimely passing. He was a young man. He had an awful lot of living to do. He had a lot of work to do. He was busy in his role, in his ambassadorial role, and he excelled in it. And I just want to say how genuinely sorry we are. I made friends with him over a long period of time and met with him on many occasions, and we had many interesting debates and exchanges, and I'm sorry at his passing. Now, could I go to Vice Chairman Terry Leyden, please, for your contribution and the Ministers?
Just very briefly, I'd just like to welcome Minister Helen McEntee and her team and guests as well in the audience. Just say, in relation to the informal meeting in Salzburg, it was kind of disappointing in a sense. I feel that there was a certain isolation of Prime Minister Theresa May. I think it's very important that we keep a very close contact with the United Kingdom during these negotiations. I accept that we're one of the 27 and 26 in ourselves, but from the long relationship between the United Kingdom, going back to the 1965 Anglo-Irish Free Trade Agreement, which was signed by the Irish Taoiseach then, Seán and UK Prime Minister Harold Wilson, 8 years before the both countries joined the EEC in 1973, that our relationship is special, and I do feel that there should be some consideration for a unique economic zone between the United Kingdom and Ireland, because of our trading relationship of 1.1 billion a week, and the fact that we have had this relationship for so long. And Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is only 1% of the total population of the European Union, but we are the most affected by the ongoing negotiations and the Brexit situation. So I just feel, and I'd suggest the Minister and the Taoiseach and the Foreign Minister and others, that it was seen to me that from television reports that Prime Minister May was terribly isolated, which I thought was very unfair, actually, quite frankly, because it's vital that we have a very strong relationship, and British Irish Parliamentary Assembly will be going to London in October, and we intend to hopefully meet the Prime Minister there, actually, and to be a conduit to assist and to get to Mr Barnier, the fact that we have to recognise the sensitivities at the moment in relation to the British government and what's going to happen in the future. Also, the whole question of computerisation and the approach to actually modernisation of the control of borders is a possible solution as well. But all in all, it's a very difficult time, and also we're facing into the European elections of 2019, where we're getting 2 extra seats. But in fact, none of the extra seats in the European Parliament for Ireland have been allocated to the western portion of the constituency of Ireland. And I felt that it would be a very useful conduit for those representing the northwest, west, that they would take into consideration their extra responsibility, I believe, after Brexit, that they would also represent the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. So I know myself and my colleague had to go to the vote. So thanks very much, Minister. I'm sorry we have to leave.
Very much in welcoming Minister Helen and our colleagues, and to agree very much with what Senator Terry said about the importance of our relationship with Britain, which goes back to the foundation of the state, given all the cultural, social, business ties, family, everything. And I know that we intend to strengthen those relations, but I think it's very important, Chairman, that this committee plays its part, as it has been doing. And I hope that some of us will go, and I put my name down to go, seeing that we were meeting various committees over. I think, as Terry has said, the relationship with our British counterparts in both houses is vital. And I think that's what Heidi was arranging for us. So I thank Minister Helen very much for her comprehensive overview, and we look forward to keeping in touch. And sorry for this.
Thank you very much, Senator. I understand fully that the two senators are caught with the vote that's taking place in the Shannon at the moment. Deputy Seán Haughey, please.
Well, thank you, Chairman. You're down to your last deputy. I think the 3:30 start probably didn't suit us on this occasion. There's a lot happening in the House today. Just could I thank the Minister for her comprehensive briefing on all the issues of the day in relation to the European Union, to know what she has said in relation to Brexit and the backstop. And I agree with my colleague Senator Leyden. I do think if I had one criticism of the government's approach, I think the Taoiseach would need to improve his relationship with the British Prime Minister Theresa May. I think that would help the situation. But otherwise, we're all singing off the same hymn sheet in relation to Brexit, and we wish you and the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach success over the coming weeks, because that's in all our interests. I also noted what you have to say in relation to the multi-financial framework and the emphasis you're placing on CAP. I think that's very important as well. I just want to raise one substantial issue, and that's in relation to migration. It would seem to me that migration is one of the biggest issues facing the European Union, one of the biggest challenges facing the European Union. And I note what Donald Tusk said to the informal meeting of the European Council when he called for a constructive approach to solve the migration crisis. And he called for a broader vision of partnership. I think this is a crucial issue. We are a little bit removed from it here in the Republic of Ireland because of our geographical location. But you just have to look at what's happening throughout the European Union. Generally, there's a rise of populist parties, a rise of nationalist right parties, and a rise of neo-fascist far-right parties. So it is a worry. These parties are challenging the values of the European Union. And I note, Minister, what you have said in your contribution in relation to the Irish approach to this. I welcome the fact that we are playing a constructive approach because we are all Europeans. And I would just say that it's very important, I think, that in this country and indeed in the other EU states, that we need to manage diversity. And we need to implement successful integration policies. We can learn from other mistakes made by other EU states. Integration is the key. We need to play our role in the overall context. I know the word has been, or the words have been used, burden sharing. So we're ready and willing to play our role. We realise this is a crucial issue facing Europe as a whole, but I do think we need to have a conversation about it in this country. We have managed the situation very well. I was on an Emirates flight recently, and there was a documentary about the refugees arriving in Ballydreen. Very good documentary, where there was a lot of fear initially, and after several weeks then it seems that those who had reservations came round to the idea of the refugees settling in that particular community. So I just think it's a debate that we need to have in this committee, it's a debate we need to have in this country, and now it's a debate we need to have at an EU level, how we manage the migration issue, because it is a big challenge, it's a big issue. We have elections to the European Parliament next year. I don't think Irish people have, in many cases, given serious consideration to who they elect to the European Parliament. It can be seen as a way of protesting about issues of local or indeed national interest, and I really think, that the elections need to be seriously considered by all of us who we elect to the European Parliament, given the challenges that Europe faces at this time. And I just think migration is something that Ireland needs to pay particular attention to because, as I say, we can learn from the mistakes made by other EU states, and it's an issue that's not going to go away.
Thank you very much, Deputy Haughey. Minister, I suppose next week this committee will be considering the subsidiarity report of the task force that considered whether changes were needed. I was wondering whether the government has a position on that report, whether you've discussed it yet, or are you able to let us have your viewpoints on it? And other issues there, Minister, that are becoming so evident, that are of major importance to people here in our country. For instance, I'm sure that you're acutely aware of what is happening, and I attribute it directly in many of the instances because our market was going up to the north and it seems to have dried up, and that is the alarming decrease in the value of beef at present. And I have reports from yesterday, last Thursday, Saturday, various marts around my own county, and the prices that are being paid are shocking at a time when farmers are desperate to bring in a bit of income to pay for winter fodder, and they're really, really worried about the future. And the word that is being used is, well, yes, we're contributing other factors, the weather, the summer that we had, the problems. Well, it might have been a great summer in many respects, but the problems that it has created for us. But as a community, the farming community today, I was down below with the IFA representatives from all around the country, and many of the people there giving the presentation, there was a number of issues of concern, obviously, with regard to the forthcoming budget. But one of the things that was being spoken about an awful lot below at that presentation today was Brexit and how it was going to impinge and affect us in the farming sector. You see, the farmers of Ireland, as you know yourself, Minister, are very resilient and are always able to and up for a challenge. But you know, there's only so many fights you can fight, and when you're being surrounded on all corners, it's harder to fight if you feel everything is coming in on top of you. And certainly in the farming community at this time of the year, when people are selling weanlings and when people are trying to bring in their money for the winter, and every person, like especially people with sucking cows, this is their hay time, this is their time to bring in their bit of money. And the prices that they're getting when they go to the mart are just abysmal. The prices are on the floor, and it's a matter of how much are they actually losing on each animal that they're selling. Keeping them is not an option, because not only do they need to bring in money, but the additional costs of putting those animals in for the winter, keeping them for the winter, buying the feed for them, it's really, really going to cause a problem. So people are faced with the prospect, these in particular days now, for the week or 2 weeks gone by, and for the next 2 weeks coming, if the prices don't improve, and I have to be honest, I'd rather always classify myself as an optimist, not a pessimist, but I can see how the prices are actually going to improve. And again, we used to have a situation where buyers used to come down from the north before and buy animals here. That is not happening now. And as you know, if the buyers aren't there in the ring, putting up their hands, if there's only a couple of buyers, it's a buyer's market then, and that's what's happening to our farmers. And if that's what's happening to us at this stage, before we've exhausted the Brexit negotiations and before we see exactly where the deck of cards is going to be lying and what way it's going to pan out for us, if this is the reaction right now, I'd be extremely fearful for the future. And that's only one sector of society. I'm only just discussing farming because it's so topical in my head these days, and having been with the IFA earlier on today and the excellent presentation that they gave to all members of the Oireachtas, I presume we were probably even there ourselves, Minister, if we're time allowed you to be so. And it's the one thing that's on everybody's lips. And at this stage, before we actually do see whether or not we're going to have a plan, or is the plan going to be that there is going to be no plan? And so we're really in uncharted waters, And to say that we're worried is an understatement. And that's before even going on to the tourism sector and what's that going to mean to us. Obviously, the government are in these days putting the final touches to the budget. The people in the hospitality sector in the county that I'm from, the 9% VAT rate that was introduced by your government in going back to 2011-12, it was seen as a saving grace for people involved in the tourism sector at the time. I'd always give full credit to the former Minister for Finance, Michael Noonan, at the time, who had the imagination and the foresight to see that that was the lifeline that we required in the sector, and it did work. And but we have two hospitality sectors in Ireland, as far as I'm concerned. We have the major cities, and then we have the rest of the country. And at the moment, when you see the prices that are being charged in cities like here versus what's charged in the rest of the country, and particularly in what I'd call rural Ireland, where they're far more reasonable and not extortionist, we feel that the timing of any changes in the 9% VAT rate, which might be imminent in the forthcoming budget, combined with the worry that we have for the English visitors who are always so welcomed by our hospitality sector and who mean so much to us coming over, and we're worried what Brexit is going to mean to those people. We don't want them to look at that it's an us and them type of a situation. They're our nearest neighbours. We appreciated their custom. We appreciated the fact of they spending their hard-earned money on coming here on holidays, whether they were from Wales, Scotland, any other part of England. We were just so glad to always have them and to welcome them, and we always felt that they appreciated their time here with us. But the messages coming at the moment are that that could indeed be affected as well with Brexit and with the currency difficulties that is bringing and possibly will bring. So these are some of the hot topics that I see as problems facing us, as of course yourself does. And I'd just like to afford Senator Craughwell the opportunity, if you would like to have a contribution before the Minister is getting ready to wrap up. But if you would like a contribution before we do so, I want to give you the opportunity, Senator, if you so wish.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I'm terribly sorry I had a delegation in and I was unable to extricate myself until now. I really only have one issue that's of concern to me. First and foremost, I need to compliment our officials, firstly, who are working right throughout the European Union on Brexit and have done an incredible job. There is nowhere that I have been in Europe where I don't hear about the Irish problem and the Irish border and everything to do with Ireland. So our officials are working overtime, and yourself, Minister, you have been working overtime as well, as is the Taoiseach and Minister Coghlan. My one concern, Minister, is the crash out, the hard Brexit that we all hear about. And it's the day after the referendum in England, I wrote about the need to manage our border. And nobody on this island, north or south, nobody in the UK wants to see a border. Nobody in Europe wants to see a border. But the way things are going, it is just possible that we will finish up with a border nobody wants. And I've been speaking to a number of people who are living north of the border in recent days, and all of them are saying to me, if this happens, and they are really afraid, they're moving south. Now, I'm full of confidence that things will work out of the way we expect, but are we putting contingency plans in place to manage a border. For, as was said by one of our colleagues in the UK Parliament, the Labour spokesperson, the Shadow Secretary, said, if you put a camera up, somebody will shoot it down or pull it down or break it, so you'll have to put somebody to mind the camera, and the moment you do that, you'll have to put somebody to mind somebody who's minding the camera, and the next thing it snowballs. And I made that point 2 years ago when I wrote the piece on the border. So if we finish up with any sort of monitoring, we finish up with a border. And I need to know, we only have 2 barracks left, one in Dundalk, one in Fenner Camp in Donegal. We have closed all of the other military barracks. We have no military presence north of a line between Dublin and Galway. We have depleted our defence forces on in close proximity to the border. We have closed all of the police stations. I was in Blackline last weekend. It's a ghost town. So my concern is, have we contingency plans in place? And if you say that you can't say, I'll understand that as well, because I do realise we're talking about a very sensitive issue. So just your views on it, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues as well. I'll maybe go backwards to everybody that's here. Senator Coghlan, in terms of a hard Brexit, obviously we're doing everything in our power to avoid that, and that is the last scenario that we want to happen. In terms of contingency planning, we are planning and we have started recruitment, and approval was given last week in Cabinet to start recruiting some 450 staff, but this is very much focused on an east-west basis. This is around additional customs, veterinary and food safety inspectors at our airports and ports, but it is only on an east-west basis. When we say that we cannot countenance or we cannot return to any kind of a border, whether it's with checks, barriers, associated checks or barriers, non-tariff barriers, whatever it is, we mean it, and that's very much the position that we have taken. And I suppose it's on the basis that the UK have given that same commitment, that the EU have given that same commitment, and the fact that it is so intrinsically linked to the Good Friday Agreement, which has been signed by all 3 I've just mentioned. So I think what we need to do now is do everything in our power, intensify our efforts, double our negotiation efforts, and try and make sure that we reach a deal, or as much as we can, by the October deadline, which allows us then to finalise something in November if there is to be a meeting then. In terms of the subsidiarity report, we're still going through as Chairman, so I will have to come back to you on that. But maybe to touch on a few things which you mentioned, while obviously some of them are more of a local or national, have a more local or national element, and obviously the budget is going to be happening in the coming weeks, so whatever will happen with the budget will happen with the budget. But maybe just in terms of tourism, obviously on an EU-wide basis, the ability for people to travel freely is obviously one of the huge benefits of the European Union, and so us remaining members of the European Union means that over 400 or around 450 million people have access to Ireland to travel, to enjoy it, to experience it in the way that they have. But it means that hopefully the UK will continue to enjoy that as well. We have, as part of the overall withdrawal agreement, agreed with the UK that the common travel area would continue. This predates both our memberships of the European Union and does allow members to travel freely north, south, east, west, Scotland, Wales as well. So that is something that we have worked very hard on over the last coming months and years, and we hope that that will continue, and obviously will enable people to still come and enjoy our country. In terms of agriculture, you know, I suppose that I think farmers have had a particularly tough year, not least with the weather, which, while we might be able to control some things, it's certainly not something we can control. And I was at the IFA meeting today. I wouldn't miss it, to be honest. And there are a number of things I suppose we're trying to do. Firstly, in terms of CAP, as I mentioned earlier in my submission, we feel, given the fact that over 80% of our funding coming from the EU goes directly to our farmers, we know the absolute benefit that that has, not just to them, their families, their communities, the ripple effect and the European added value that that has. We feel that it's imperative that we continue at that rate and that we continue to get the same level of support for our farmers. So that's something that we're working very hard at a European level to do. But also in terms of Brexit preparedness, we know from the minute that the vote happened, changes to sterling and other various different factors meant that certain agricultural industries straight away were impacted, in particular the mushroom industry. So we have tried to, since then, through budgetary measures and various different other measures, tried to mitigate the impacts already, but obviously we're looking at putting measures in place post-Brexit, and that again comes back to each individual minister, each department identifying the possible challenges, identifying what measures would need to be put in place, and now each minister has been asked to put together an action plan based on all of that work. Which will then feed into their own, obviously from an ag point of view as well. We have the chairman of the IFA, Fisheries Board and other representatives who attend the stakeholder forum, so we keep engaged with them as much as we possibly can in that regard. Deputy Haughey, in terms of migration, I suppose it is one of the biggest challenges. It's yes, one that we're removed from, but one that we certainly don't think we should remove ourselves from the conversation, and the support that we provide, the solidarity that we show, and the cooperation among member states. I suppose the dynamic has changed slightly. The number of illegal migrants coming through the European border has decreased by about 95% since its peak only a few years ago. And so what we need to do now is make sure that policies for the future work, that they support the people that they're supposed to, and that obviously we have cooperation among member states to try and implement them, which is often the hardest thing to do. We are working on a number of things. As I said, the suggestions of the disembarkation platforms, which are obviously still being worked through. There's a proposal that we would have 10,000 additional Frontex along the borders. There's obviously looking at the Dublin regulation and the European Common Asylum to try and reform that. But from our own point of view, we will continue to support Operation Sophia. We will continue to take in refugees and migrants where we can. And I think showing how they can integrate and implementing successful policies from our own point of view is really important. I don't know if any of you were able to attend a launch today of a book called 45 Stories. It's a European Commission project here in Ireland, and it took into account various different projects ranging from individual businesses to environment and elsewhere, and how the EU has supported them. And the particular project from my own county in Meath very much focused on individuals coming to live in Ireland from outside the European Union, focusing on tackling the issues of racism, of workplace discrimination and various other things. So we need to continue working on those while also looking at the bigger picture and supporting other member states. I think in terms of Brexit, to touch on the issue of our relationship with the UK will continue to be a valuable and important member state and country for us post-Brexit. It has been obviously physically our closest neighbour, but has been our closest friend on many big issues as well. And I think following Brexit, we don't want that to change. Obviously, we had the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, which met for the first time this summer. There have been continuous engagements on our ministers in areas of mutual interest. We are looking at opening a new embassy in Cardiff. We're adding additional staff to embassy in London. We try and engage in as much as we can, but what we can't do throughout these negotiations is to engage in bilaterals or side negotiations with the UK. If we do that, then our position, I believe, is gone. The solidarity among the 26 other member states will be gone. So I think we need to hold firm. It doesn't mean ostracise or alienate anybody, and from my own point of view, having been in Salzburg, I believe member states merely reiterated the EU's position, and that is that we can't break up the single market, that there are elements of the Chequers paper that work, there are elements that don't, and from an Irish point of view, we merely restated our position that there cannot be a reimposition of a hard border on the island of Ireland. How that came across or was portrayed, I suppose we can't predict that ourselves, but I think what's important now is that we work together, that the UK bring forward their own proposals, which they say that they have, and that we try and reach an agreement. In terms of, and I know that Senator Leyden has raised this before, in terms of an EU-UK economic zone, to me that would suggest Ireland being different to the rest of the EU, and again, I don't think that is something we should be looking at. Our overall trade to the UK, while in agriculture, yes, it's significantly high. Our overall trade is less than 16%. Our overall trade to the EU last year was 33%, so almost twice that amount. So I think we need to be very strong in our commitment to the EU, but obviously trying to get the best possible outcome overall. There was a mention in terms of the seats and the redistribution. That was obviously something, there was a process that went through. My understanding is that the northern constituency lost 2 counties, didn't gain a seat, but the Southern gained the 2 counties, gained a seat, and Dublin gained 1 other. So there was obviously a process that went through that to get to that point. And given the challenges and the uncertainty around Northern Ireland, I'm not sure where where that could have fit into it as well. So really, just to, I suppose, thank members for your support, for your engagement in the committee here. Our focus is Brexit, to try and get the best possible outcome. We will continue to work on everybody's behalf so that there is as little disruption to people's lives, to their businesses, communities as well, and that at the end of this we still have a strong relationship with the UK and that we're able to move forward from this.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I neglected to say earlier on that there was a very interesting showcase of celebrating 45 years of our membership earlier on today here in the houses of the Oireachtas, and it was excellent to see, for example, a gentleman by the name of Michael who was there explaining how he benefited from the cross-border initiative, the health initiative, whereby he was able to have a bionic arm fitted after a very serious accident in which he lost his arm. And I know firsthand myself from dealing with the cross-border directive every week, sending patients up to the north. Last week was my last group of 14, and amazingly enough, in just a very short week or 10 days, I have another 14 ready to go again. We won't go into the ins and outs of why we have to use that initiative, but the way I put it is, it's great to have it, and that is a worry again as to where we will be with that post-Brexit. Will that service be there for us? Will we be able to avail of it? Nobody can answer us yet. So that and many of the other questions are still in the air, but we'll just carry on with the work. And again, to thank you, Minister, you were always very readily available to come to us here to the committee. I know the members appreciate it, and another group of people that I too, both present and in the department, I want to thank very, very sincerely the officials, what I would call the unsung heroes of this battle, because they're working hard and diligently in trying to ensure that that we will get the best deal possible for our country and for our people, and that is so important. And that work might not be acknowledged every day by politicians, but I certainly want to, on behalf of the committee, I want to acknowledge it here today. And I would hope that it would be relayed to them, because I know that there is a massive effort being put in trying to deal with the problems and the difficulties that we have. So thank you again, Minister, and I will be proposing that we suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the Minister to leave, and when we return...
Just one moment before you do.
Yes.
I won't put the Minister on the spot today, but something I'd like you to address the next time you come here. The land bridge may prove to be a problem post-Brexit, and Michel Barnier, when he met the chair and the committee, said funding would be available for the development of, if you want, a high-speed or a superhighway between Ireland and Europe directly, so into Zeebrugge or into Cologne or into Roscoff or one of the various. And I just wonder, is that something the government have been looking at as a contingency plan as well? I won't ask you to deal with it today, but the next time you're here, if you don't mind.
Minister?
On a certain amount, if that's okay. Yeah. I mean, this is an issue which has been raised continuously, and while obviously we can't deal with some of the future relationship, we can discuss the challenges, and the land bridge is particularly one of those. The EU Commission, the UK and the Member States are well aware of this and are trying to address it at the moment. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, in terms of the overall budget, what we specifically, and my colleagues in Belgium as well, raised the issue that there needed to be perhaps a flexibility within our next MFF to try and deal with some of the challenges of Brexit, depending on what the outcome is in those countries that may be impacted more than others. And so perhaps that is something that could fall into that, but it's also been taken into consideration. So it's a significant issue, that in aviation, and obviously a number of key issues. So.
Sorry for moments.
No, it's okay.
Thank you very much. So we will suspend for a few moments, and when we return, we'll be in private session.